My name is Laura Bennett, and for most of my marriage I believed I was living a quiet, stable life. We lived in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing flashy. A 3-bedroom house in a clean neighborhood, a backyard with 2 palm trees, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee in the mornings. I worked as a dental assistant at a small clinic 10 minutes from our home, and my husband Ryan worked in real estate. From the outside, our life looked perfectly normal. But if you've ever been in a relationship where one person slowly takes control of everything, you know how quietly imbalance can grow. Ryan liked control, not in loud ways. He wasn't the type to scream or throw things. His control was quieter, more calculated. He handled every financial decision in our marriage. When we bought our house, Ryan told me the paperwork would be easier if everything was under his name. It's just temporary, he said. Banks prefer one primary bar. When we opened investment accounts, he said it made sense to keep them organized under his financial profile because of his work in real estate. When we purchased a second rental property 3 years later, he explained that his credit history made the process smoother if the title stayed in his name. Each time, his explanation sounded logical, and each time, I trusted him. After all, we were married for 11 years. I believed we were building a life together. But about a year ago, something in Ryan started changing. He began staying out later. Work dinners turned into weekend conferences. Phone calls that used to happen in the living room suddenly moved outside onto the patio, where his voice dropped into whispers. At first, I ignored it, not because I didn't notice, but because sometimes the truth feels too heavy to confront right away. Then one evening in early spring, Ryan came home unusually quiet. He placed his briefcase on the counter and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I think we should talk about the future," he said. That sentence should have been the warning. Because when someone begins a conversation that way, it usually means they've already made their decision. Ryan explained calmly that he felt our marriage had grown apart. That he believed we wanted different things in life. That separating would probably be healthier for both of us. While he spoke, his tone stayed smooth, controlled, almost rehearsed. Then he said something that made the room feel suddenly colder. "You should start looking for an apartment," he added. "The house and properties are in my name, so legally it's simpler that way." For a few seconds I didn't respond, because in that moment I realized something very important. Ryan had been planning this for a long time. Every financial decision, every property purchase, every document he kept under his name. He believed that when the marriage ended, I would walk away with nothing. And the truth is, for a moment, I almost believed him. But there's something people often misunderstand about quiet women. Just because we don't argue, every decision doesn't mean we aren't paying attention. Over the years, while Ryan managed our finances, I handled something else. Paperwork, tax records, insurance renewals, mail. Small things that most people consider boring details. One of those boring details happened 6 years earlier. The year Ryan bought our first rental property. At the time he'd asked me to help organize the closing documents because he was traveling for work. The title, paperwork, loan disclosures, and tax filings were delivered to the house while he was away. I sorted everything into folders and placed copies in our home filing cabinet, including one document Ryan apparently forgot existed: the homestead declaration. For those who don't know, Arizona has something called a homestead protection law. It protects the primary residence of a married couple from being transferred or leveraged without both spouses acknowledging the property as a marital home. When I organized those documents years ago, the closing attorney had asked me to sign the declaration confirming the home as our shared residence. Ryan must have assumed it was routine paperwork. He never asked about it again. But that document meant something very important. Legally, the house could not be treated as solely his property. During divorce proceedings, which meant Ryan's entire plan to push me out quietly, had a problem. I didn't tell him any of this that night at the kitchen table. Instead, I nodded slowly and said something simple. Okay. Ryan looked relieved. I think he expected a fight, tears, maybe anger. Instead, I calmly stood up, rinsed my coffee cup in the sink, and went to bed. The next morning, I made one phone call. The attorney whose name appeared on the closing documents. Her name was Angela Rupp, and when I explained the situation, she asked me to bring the paperwork to her office. 2 days later, we sat across from each other in a small downtown Phoenix law office reviewing the files. Angela read quietly for nearly 15 minutes. Then she smiled. Your husband made a mistake, she said. That was the first time I felt something close to peace. Because Ryan believed he had secured every asset under his name, but the law didn't see things the way he did. The Homestead Declaration legally recognized the house as shared marital property. And since the rental properties were purchased using income generated during the marriage, those assets also fell under community property law. In simple terms, Ryan hadn't protected himself. He had just assumed I didn't understand the paperwork. Over the next month, we prepared everything carefully: financial records, property, purchase dates, mortgage payments, tax filings. Meanwhile, Ryan continued acting like the outcome was already decided. He even began moving some of his belongings into a condo downtown. The confidence in his voice whenever we spoke told me he believed he had already won. The divorce hearing took place in late October. Ryan arrived with his attorney looking calm and composed. When the judge began reviewing financial assets, his lawyer explained that the house and properties were registered solely under Ryan's name. For a moment, Ryan glanced toward me with the faintest hint of satisfaction. Then Angela placed a single document on the judge's desk. The Homestead Declaration. I watched Ryan's expression change. Slowly as the judge read it, the courtroom became very quiet, because that one document changed everything. The judge ruled that the primary residence must be treated as shared marital property, and once that determination was made, the rest of the financial structure followed. Community property laws applied, which meant half of every asset Ryan believed he owned alone legally belonged to me: the house, the rental properties, even part of the real estate commissions he earned during the marriage. When the hearing ended, Ryan looked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he believed. A few months later, the final settlement was completed. Ryan sold the rental properties to divide the assets. I kept the house in Phoenix, something I never expected to happen when that conversation started at our kitchen table. Sometimes, people expect revenge stories to end with dramatic confrontations, but the truth is much quieter. The real victory happened months later when I sat on my back patio one evening watching the sunset over those same 2 palm trees that had stood in our yard for years. For the first time, the house felt entirely peaceful, because it was finally mine. If there's one thing I learned from everything that happened, it's this: the people who believe they control everything often overlook the smallest details. And sometimes, one forgotten document is all it takes to change the entire story. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life inspired stories about relationships, betrayal, and quiet justice, make sure you subscribe and join us for the next story, because sometimes the calmest revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself.